Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're now live on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Asset Management Forum on the 9th of March 2021. I am your Chair, Councillor Paul Hayward. I'd also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn off any telephone devices off or to silent. In the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut,
I've had a reply.
Thank you, Councillor Jung. As we try to connect, after 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all microphones are muted. I'm looking at you, Councillor Young. When you are not speaking, to avoid any background noise levels, and please keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and please do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue or yellow hand and wait to be called. We'll now start the meeting by doing a roll call of forum members here present. Could you please now unmute your microphone and say when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with Councillor Arnott, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
I am here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Present, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowland.
Present and almost correct.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair. You have a full membership this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today, and any members of the public watching and other members in attendance today. Lovely to see you. Agenda item 1, public speaking. I do not believe there are any members of the public registered to speak today. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. So agenda item 2, notes from the previous meetings held on the 1st of December 2020 and the 16th of February 2021. If anyone has any comment on these minutes, please do so by raising your electronic hand. If I see no electronic hands raised, I will take this as an indication that you all agree to those minutes of the previous meetings. And I see no electronic hands or physical hands. So thank you. The minutes of the previous meetings are agreed. Agenda item 3, apologies. We have none from committee members, and I believe we have an apology from Councillor Jeff Pook, who is a non-forum member, but a member of this authority. So thank you, Councillor Pook. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. This will also be done by roll call. Back to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Arnott first, please.
None, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Yes, my usual declaration as the clerk to All Saints, Chardstock and Newton Poppleford and Hertford parish councils, all of whom may or may not be involved in the business we're considering today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
No interest to declare, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
None that I'm aware of at this time, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
None, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rowland.
None, thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Back
Chair,
to you,
I'm terribly sorry. Can I come back? I realise if we're talking about asset dispersal, so to speak, potentially to parishes and towns, can I declare, please, Debbie, I'm a parish councillor at Collerton Parish Council. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. I've got that. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, members. So agenda item 5, matters of urgency. I don't have any, and I'm not aware there are any, so that's none. Agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. There are no items on this agenda which officers recommend should be dealt with in confidential session, which is wonderful. Agenda item 7, property matters newsletters, pages 11 to 14 of the reports pack. May I present our service lead, Mr. Tim Child. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is an information item only. we bring Property Matters newsletter forward to all AMF meetings. We've been doing so probably for the best part of the last 2 or 3 years. It just gives, hopefully, AMF a flavour of the type of work that we're doing. So it's for information only, hopefully a nice brief agenda item, but one that's hopefully of interest to you all. And happy to take any questions if you have any, otherwise we'll move on if that's okay.
I do have one. It's not so much a question, it's just really an update. At last night's Axminster Town Council meeting, of which I'm not a member of that authority, but I was just viewing at the invitation of the chair, there was a very in-depth discussion from a member of the public who is keen on the rollout of EV chargers, something we're all, be aware of and all promoting. And whilst I was able to outline what East Devon have done, what we're hoping to do, and what the general movement forwards is, the town council were, I wouldn't say dismissive, but frustrated that progress isn't faster, which of course we all share due to a variety of factors. So I did, and declaring an interest here, I did encourage them to talk to yourself, Mr. Child, talk to Mr. Ennis, talk to myself, talk to their ward members, and put their case forward. This is the whole point of the consultation we're doing, is we hold assets. If they believe that they can use those more productively for the greater good of their residents, then I heartily encourage them to come forwards. And on the subject of EV chargers, I mean, they were talking in very high numbers, hundreds. Now I'm not sure. I'd be delighted if fleets and fleets of electric vehicles came to Axminster, stopped for 45 minutes and spent their money in our town. That's not at the denigration of Honiton or Ottery or anywhere else, but I'm an Axminsteran, so I would say that. But yes, so I think there is a groundswell in the parishes and the towns and wider East Devon for this sort of facility. So I'm personally delighted that we're moving forward with it as we can. I have 3 hands up, so I'll do them in the order. Let me just see. I'm not sure if it comes up on here in the order they came up. Bear with me one moment. Okay, so I have an order here. Councillor Davey, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a quick question about 51 St Andrews Road, Exmouth. I'm delighted to see that the council has acquired this. I just wondered what the criteria are going to be for the letting of that. What sort of target audience do you have in mind?
Thank you, Councillor Davey. That's a bit of a tricky question, because our involvement is around acquiring the asset, which we've done for the housing service to then run in the way they see fit. Rob may or may not have further details, Rob Harrison, on the basis that it was his team that dealt with this. But ordinarily, our involvement is in securing the acquisition of these flats, which, as a 7 flats here, is a really good success. But in terms of exactly the criteria, that would be a question I'd suggest for Joe Garford, the acting service lead for housing, unless Rob Harrison is able to advise.
I can't add anything to that, Tim.
Okay.
It would be something that we'd defer to housing.
Councillor David, would you like? I can after the meeting email Jo Garford and just ask her to respond directly to you if you'd like.
That's all right, Tim. I'll do it. I'll
Okay,
get in
right,
touch
thank
with
you.
Jo. That's fine.
Right, thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim. Moving on, Councillor Rowland. Jack.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks very much for the newsletter information. I just want to mention a subject which is not included in a newsletter, and stop me if this is not an appropriate time to raise it. But I was just looking back on some previous minutes of the forum, and it's the subject to do with the Seaton workshops in Colliford Road and the associated Harepath Road development. And it's now a year since there was mention of a wider strategic review and a report being brought forward. But nothing's mentioned in this newsletter on that particular subject, so I just wondered if there's anything that could be added now as to what's happening on that subject.
Okay, so Chair, would you like me to respond direct?
Oh, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, Councillor Redden, over the years, there's been numerous, probably too many to count, reports that have come forward. The fundamental issue that has stopped the projects progressing has been one of viability. So there are the two sites, the Colliford Road site, which I think in workshop employment type uses is probably slightly more questionable on that site. There is then the Harepath Road site and Fossway, I think it's Fossway Park or Fossway Park, I think it is, and the industrial estate. That one is in many ways more straightforward. But again, there has been an issue around viability. Now, we have explored with that particular latter one, the early stages of a direct disposal. We then entered COVID, the world of COVID. And because of that, that was seen then not to be a good time to market that site for those employment units. It was then interestingly discussed at the special AMF that we had back in February this year. So our last meeting, which was all around the Place and Prosperity Investment Fund. And that, for me, could be the tool to actually get these sites delivered, in that in that the financial driver, if the Place and Prosperity Investment Fund progresses and is adopted, so as per the discussions at the February meeting, and hopefully the discussions that will then follow from today's meeting, then strictly speaking, it enables an investment by the council to proceed, subject to proviso that we cover the borrowing costs and not looking for a yield return. That is one of the real challenges we've had before. So build costs. So, and it's been looked at, and I'm sure if Councillor Pook were at this meeting, he'd share with you his thoughts. But this has been considered on numerous occasions over many years. We had an issue with the spec being really high for the units. Through AMF, we then we then agreed a lower spec, but in the same time, construction costs were shooting up even quicker than the amount we saved in terms of lowering the spec. So actually, the costs have just increased and increased. The rental returns haven't increased by the same element, but to the same extent. And the nature of the types of tenants we were looking to attract, so relatively small tenants on relatively flexible lease terms, it just didn't financially stack up. But with the new Place and the new Place and Prosperity Investment Fund that we'll be talking about later, if adopted, will potentially unblock that. But yeah, we've had COVID in the last year, so to market the units, to market that one unit or that one site a year ago wouldn't have probably been the best thing to do. Well, it certainly wouldn't have been. And I'd probably say to deal with that now in isolation, probably again wouldn't be the best thing to do now until we properly considered how we could use the Place and Prosperity Fund to potentially deliver it ourselves as opposed to putting it on the market. But we know there's interest out there, which is good.
Thank you, Tim. Is that okay, Councillor Rowland?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Perhaps we'll take this offline and have some other discussions about this.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
Councillor Pratt, I know that you also recently discussed this and brought this subject up. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Thanks, Councillor Hayward. Yes, well, the matter came up at the last meeting. We were inquiring about existing assets of the council, and I sent an email to Tim requesting details of any land which was unoccupied or redundant. And these two sites at Seaton came up, and I obviously don't know too much about the Seaton sites because I'm not. I don't know Seaton that well, but the matter was helped by Dan Ledger, who gave me some background information. Of course, Jack Rowlands has also got the matter in hand because he's a councillor for Seaton. These sites have been around for some time, and I think we need to get going on them and try and sort them out one way or the other. So I just really would rely on the Seaton councillors to lend a hand here, because they know these sites far better than most of us.
Thank you very much indeed. I wholeheartedly agree. Just before I bring in Councillor Arnott, do any of the non-forum members present wish to comment on this subject? No. One thing I suppose that Tim just alluded to is both Jack and I represent in different ways the Science Park, Exeter Science Park. And whilst they are onwards and upwards the whole time and have someone, very, very shrewd and very affirmative at the helm, what they recognise most readily is actually acquiring private sector finance to build buildings that, once you build them, are worth less than what you paid to build them. That unfortunately is something that stands in their way of commercial investment. But of course, the purpose of today's meeting and the funds we as an authority have is we're not constrained by that. So we can build things for social economic good. Obviously, we have to allow these things to wash their face, but we have perhaps a longer return period than some commercial lenders would expect to get their payback in. So that's certainly a weapon we have at our disposal. Councillor Arnott and then Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tim, as ever, for a very interesting report. Yeah, just coming back, Councillor Ledger, I'm getting a bit confused on this. So can you remind me, there's a company who is looking to provide us with a service for electric charging points quite quickly. Can you remind me about that? Because I know we wanted to deal with this at Cabinet last week and we weren't able to. But just to advise, there will be a Cabinet a week tomorrow. So I would hope that comes back there and we can move on. But to be honest with you, I'm a bit fuzzy about the very granular details. There you go, I've never used that word, as people say. So can you just remind us about that? What the background to it is and what it will deliver?
I think it'd be Councillor Hayward would be better with that rather than myself.
Oh, did I say Councillor Ledger?
You did,
Councillor. No, he would be utterly hopeless at answering this. I think we could all agree with that. No, sorry, Dan. Councillor Hayward, yes, please, thank you.
I don't know whether that's a compliment or an insult, Councillor Arnott, but I'll take it as the former. Thank you. And Councillor Ledger, please don't be offended. Well, I mean, we are hopefully hoping to have a report from Mr. Ennis, who has provided me with a draft of it. Very comprehensive report, very, very encouraging. And it sort of stems along the model of Mid Devon District Council, which I circulated to members of Cabinet and is widely available on the internet as well, which is council has an asset. We own the car parks, we own the bays. So we just have to crunch some numbers and consider that in turning, let's say, 2 bays into EV charging points, you lose those 2 spaces to general car parking revenue, but you gain in other ways. Now, the model that's on the table via this Innovate scheme, which is a sort of an extension of an Exeter scheme, is that Innovate or another. There are other EV charging commercialities available. They provide all the capital, they do all the infrastructure, and they simply enter into an agreement with an authority to make those spaces available. The council then negotiates a sum, be it rent for the spaces or revenue based on the profitability of those EV chargers. And that provides an income stream. And then what it comes down to, as always, is a numbers game. You know, what we're possibly going to lose from those two spaces. But of course, you know, anything like that, it's a question of semantics, because if your car parks were 100% full all the time, then arguably, yes, you're losing revenue. Well, I think most of us would say that our car parks in our town, certainly for, you know, West Street car park in Axminster, and they're keeping it local again. At the moment, you could probably put 500, let's say 50 EV chargers there, and it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference other than generating income if we could get 50 EV car users to regularly use them. Obviously, the companies themselves, they do their due diligence and they look at the location, they have all the numbers, they crunch the data. But that's the report that I'm very much hoping that Mr. Ennis can bring to that cabinet meeting so cabinet can consider it. It's one of those ones that on paper, and to quote the phrase from Councillor Stanley, who's given me his authority to, you know, mention our discussion from Mid-Devon, it's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer. There's no capital risk to the council other than a revenue potential loss, but that's made up by the other revenue that comes in and the benefits of having those EV chargers here in terms of tourism, in terms of economic boost, and just in terms of, you know, working towards our green credentials. We are a green council. We have made commitments to go green. Well, EV chargers are one of those ways moving forwards. Now, this committee, this council, cabinet may decide to, you know, go all out and say, right, well, in a car park such as that, what we'll do is we'll use some of our funding to build covered walkways. Those covered walkways could be covered in solar panels. It's innovative. It's certainly something we haven't done before, but something has to be done. The gentleman who presented Axminster yesterday, Mr. Smith, again, he's out there publicly. He showed an example, I think it was, and Councillor Moulding may have to help me here, somewhere in Essex, I can't remember where it was, but somewhere in Essex, covered arrays, covered in solar panels. They protect the vehicles underneath. They provide shade in summer, protection in winter, and they generate electrical juice at the same time. So it seems a fait accompli. Yes, there's an investment, but it's for a long-term goal, which is sometimes where commercial companies aren't interested. They want their return within a set period. We as a council can do things in the long game. So I'm sorry it's a bit long-winded, Councillor Arnott, but that's basically it.
Okay, can I just to try to clarify from the democratic point of view, as I understand it, if this was to be approved by Cabinet and subsequently Council, it would be possible to get on with this straight away. Is that correct?
I need to seek some clarity on that, but we have the 151 officer here. I mean, essentially, there's some officer time would be involved in terms of drafting the legals, the leases. But as I understand it, and I await that report to be considered, there's no capital outlay. Essentially, the cost to the council is the time of officers preparing the documents.
I suppose what's behind my question, Chair, sorry to interrupt, and then I'll so is that what I'm mindful of is that we have April 17th, we have circumstances changing in one small way, end of May, probably in a very significant way. It does look likely as if our quite substantially tourist-based economy will have a bumper time, June, July, August, September. So it's, yes, I'm mindful of all the usual cautions. I mean, would you agree, you know, we should, as much as possible, get on with this so that we can, I think, you know, we have a portfolio holder for tourism now. I think our council will look extremely good promoting this. You know, come to East Devon to charge your car. Well, no, sorry, that's not quite the logo, is it? But the slogan. But you know what I mean. We should be proud. You know, we have a climate action agenda. This seems to me something that is that would be a notable achievement. and as I understand it, at very little cost to ourselves. So it's just a question of me understanding what the, we want to hit this summer is the question, isn't it? Is the question, I suppose.
Well, speaking personally, yes, yes, and yes. Let's just crack on. I cannot see really any reason why we wouldn't be anything than chomping at the bit to take this forward as a matter of extreme urgency. But, perhaps that's for Cabinet to discuss, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you.
Councillor Ledger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off by declaring an interest, just as a personal one, that obviously Fossway Park's mentioned, and my family own the adjacent units to the site. So I'll start off with that. And then just to kind of move the agenda on a little bit, I'm happy to propose that we note the report. Thank Tim, Rob and the team for putting it together. It's fantastic. It's great to see so many things happening within Seaton.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder from the forum? Councillor Rowland, thank you. All those in favour? Do we have show of hands on the screen? Is that okay from a democratic point of view? Yeah.
You could try some green ticks, Chair, now that we know they're working.
Okay, well, if everyone's happy to, let's try some green ticks.
That'd be great. It's just that not all the public, and certainly me, can't see every screen, so that'd be fab. Yep, that's great. Thank you, Chair. That's everyone that's content to note that.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we now move on, my apologies, to item 8, the Community Asset Transfer Procedure Update, which is on page 15 of your pack. Mr. Child, back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, a very brief report. I suspect in terms of the debate, I suspect it will be more around the next report, which is around the Place and Prosperity Investment Fund and next steps. So just very briefly on this one. So we debated the draft community asset transfer procedure in some detail at our last AMF in December last year. Following that meeting, there were a few very minor tweaks that officers were asked to make, and then we were asked to commence the consultation process with parishes and towns. We've done that now, we've commenced that. The consultation commenced on the 25th of February, so what, 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks ago. At the time, we circulated not only the consultation questionnaire, which is a SNAP survey, which we worked with Jamie Buckley, Council Officer, to help prepare. We issued it to AMF members on the 25th of February for information, we included the SNAP survey, but we also included all the covering letter with the explanation. The consultation will run through until the 25th of April. We extended the consultation period by a short period, following advice from others, conscious that it obviously covered the Easter period. What's important is next steps. So consultation closes on the 25th of April. There will then be a further report back to June, so the June AMF, after which it will then be taken to Cabinet to get the procedure adopted. And I think that will be a really, really key milestone and a really, really important statement. Alongside the consultation work that's happening now, officers are beginning to give some further thought to how we sort of classify assets. So those that are potentially suitable for asset transfer and those that aren't. And I'll be talking that through with Councillor Hayward shortly, probably at my next monthly briefing. But then again, that will come back to AMF as well in some detail moving forward. So really, it's just a very short progress update. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions from non-members of the forum here? Councillor Young, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I do apologise for butting in at the beginning of the meeting. I just wasn't quite set. I know what some parishes and towns will be asking, and that is what is up for grabs and what isn't. I haven't been asked the question yet, but I'm ready for it. The other issue is we have done asset transfers before to some parishes and towns. I can think of the Woodbury car park and toilets, and East Budley toilets and their car park. So it'd be interesting to hear how they've got on, and the experiment that we did in Beer, how they've got on, to see how the process actually does work. Now, for the benefit of the meeting, I'm a parish council at Woodbury, and we're looking at the toilets there, which is on a bit of waste ground basically next to the toilets. It would make a very good office for the parish council and a meeting room. It's right next to the village hall. So we're looking at knocking up the toilets down, providing a public access one disabled loo, and the rest of it will make over for office and a meeting room. So now there are lessons that we can get from the rest of the district, and possibly lessons from other districts. That's all I'm going to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Knowing the clerk of Woodbury fairly well, I'm sure he'll be delighted when people say, "Where's the clerk?" and you say, "Oh, the office above the toilet." But I know the situation in Woodbury. So yes, so as a clerk myself, I can confirm this consultation has gone out. As a clerk, I'm putting it before the members of my three authorities, and I hope all other councils are doing the same. Yes, for the very smaller parish councils, I suppose they will either not respond, or they'll put a no comment, or we note sort of thing. But for those parishes and towns where they do have East Devon assets on their patch, I would hope that they engage fully. And I take on board entirely what you say, Councillor Young. Ultimately it will come down to what can we get, how much for, and what are the terms. But that's not the purpose of this policy, this consultation. It's just to essentially consult on the policy itself. Is it fit for purpose? Does it work for the towns and parishes? So I hope we get a very good response. Whatever response we get, we'll consider and we'll move forwards. Certainly, again, in Axminster last night, I said to them, this is your golden opportunity. And I hope all ward members, I emailed out to all ward members on the council personally, and asked them all to make sure that they work with their parish and town councils to get it on the agenda, get it discussed. Because if it's not discussed, if not on the agenda, it dies a death. And that's not the point of consultations. We actively are seeking the views of those authorities. So I hope they do grasp the opportunity. Okay, well, there's no other speakers here. So therefore, we do have a recommendation, which I'm happy to move from the chair, that we note Mr. Child's update, and we move on to the next agenda item. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Rowan. That was a bit squeaky of me. Okay, could I ask you all to show with your green ticks that you're happy to note?
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is now underway. Okay, Chair, the vote is carried by 5 votes in favour, none against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so now we move to agenda item 9, the Place and Prosperity Investment Framework, and a report presented by the Service Lead for Place Assets and Commercialisation. Over to you again, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. So again, quite a short report, but I'm hoping for quite a detailed debate to follow in terms of how we move this forward. So we had a special AMF meeting held in Part B back on the 16th of February, where we considered both the the current commercial investment fund, but then discussed at some length how we could use an adaptation of that fund as a tool to help deliver economic recovery as we come out of COVID. Following that meeting, which was only 3 weeks ago, I've started to draft a new place and prosperity investment framework, taking on board all of the discussions that took place at that meeting. That piece of work is still very much work in progress. A draft has been forwarded to both Simon Davey and to Andy Wood for consideration, and that will come back to the next AMF meeting. I also wanted the opportunity to take that past SMT prior to it coming back to an AMF meeting, on the basis that it crosses many, if not all, of the services across the council. So there's sort of various sort of step procedure there. However, I wanted to use this report just to sort of very briefly summarise the themes within it, which hopefully won't come as any surprise, because it is as per the discussion and the outcomes from the February meeting. But then really to sort of home in on what are the priorities and objectives, and how are we therefore going to score and consider investment proposals. So I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to work through. There are just 3 bullet points where I summarise the key points. If you don't mind, there are only 3. I'm just quickly going to go through each of them one by one. So it's a framework especially for place and prosperity investments to support economic recovery. I've said that. It must cover, so investments must cover PWLB borrowing costs, and where possible and remaining economically viable, a small risk premium, but it's not to generate a commercial yield. And if providing a risk, if allowing for a risk premium makes it unviable, then we revert to a PWLB repayment and no uplift. Sitting behind, so that's a key difference to the previous commercial investment framework, which was driven by largely by yield return, but also by, we referred to within that as the catalytic effect, so the benefits on the economy, employment, tourism, etc. The second bullet point in the report, sitting behind the framework, so the framework being the objectives, the criteria, how we deliver this, is a place and prosperity investment fund, which would be agreed by council to deliver the framework. So exactly the same sort of setup, I suppose, as the commercial investment framework, but based on different criteria. And by doing so, that would avoid each investment decision needing to go back to council. The size of that fund is yet to be considered. At the February meeting, we did talk about the current commercial investment fund being 20 million, and whether that's a suitable amount. There was some suggestion it should be more. At this stage, I think the key thing is let's pull together an investment framework that fulfills the needs of the council and our communities and businesses, and then from that look at what the opportunities are, and then what an appropriate size fund would be. And then my third and final bullet point, the framework itself introduces how the fund will be utilised, the types of investment that we will consider, high-level investment criteria, risks, process and governance arrangements. So on the latter being the governance, the process and governance arrangements, The proposal is to still utilise, in part, the methodology in the existing commercial investment framework, but with some key additions. So we would still consider opportunities against an agreed scoring matrix to ensure all opportunities are considered in a consistent and fair manner, and enabling opportunities to be easily dismissed if they don't qualify. Then on to an outline business case involving key cabinet members and now ward members. That was a key outcome from that last meeting. Through to a detailed business case, now to cabinet or other member forum, which itself would include ward member comments. So it's about involving ward members at all stages, and it's about it being a member decision as opposed to an officer decision as per the commercial investment framework. So there's some sort of key differences. Yeah, so that sort of summarises where the sort of direction of travel is, and accords with the draft that I provided to Simon Davey and Andy Wood. I'm still pushing for a framework, so the same sort of arrangement whereby there's a framework that sets out what we are looking to achieve and what the objectives are, what the criteria is, and how we're going to deliver it. And then sitting behind that, an investment fund. The benefits of the framework, and this is an approach which I've seen used by many other local authorities, is that the framework sets out the high level parameters, what it is you're looking to achieve, and it does ensure that then all of these opportunities go through that same process and are dealt with consistently and in a structured way, rather than having all of these sort of different ideas coming in and all being discussed in sort of different forms and in different ways. And it also enables us to properly score and consider investments side by side, because it may be that we can't progress with everything and we've got to make a decision. So again, one of the sort of key benefits to using framework. So then moving on to what I would like in terms of a steer from the debate that I'm sure will follow shortly. So before I bring it back to a subsequent AMF, I need to obviously further refine. I need to take it via SMT and obviously and get input from key others. But the bit that I would like to address today, and again, to sort of keep things moving, so I don't want it to I think this is a really key framework to get in place, is a scoring matrix, and how we should develop a scoring matrix, if indeed members are supportive of that, to inform, subject to outline in detail business cases, what investments we should proceed with. Now, within my report, I set out two questions. So the first one is, what outcomes do these investments need to deliver? So very high level. And then secondly, what is the priority of these outcomes, and therefore relative weighting? Now, before we sort of get into the sort of detail on that, within the previous sort of current commercial investment framework, we had various different weighted scoring matrices that set out how we will consider investment opportunities that come into the mix. In that framework, we have, from recollection, I think it is 5 different scoring matrices, because we were trying to achieve lots of different things within one framework. I think this one is potentially much more straightforward, and it's about using a fund and a framework to enable, as a tool, economic recovery. And therefore, I think probably just one weighted, one scoring mechanism, however we want to do it. Andy Wood and I have had discussions around the donut model being one possible way of considering this. There are probably pros and cons of that in terms of this particular example. And really, to enable me to take the drafting of this framework forward, really want sort of a good debate now and some outcomes around how members see the high-level priorities, their sort of the relative weighting of those priorities, and any ideas on how we can articulate this all into some kind of mechanism to score opportunities. Now, apologies from Andy Wood. Andy was listening into this meeting, but has had a power cut, so he's no longer in on the meeting. He may or may not come back in. So, for the meantime, apologies from Andy Wood. So, Chair, if I can perhaps open this up to initially perhaps respond to any questions from my report, and then I suppose more importantly, a discussion and debate around members' priorities.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim, for that. Very helpful. I think, well, everyone knows to put your hand up if you want to ask questions, so I'll go straight into Councillor Davey. Sir.
Sorry, Chair, caught me out because I think Councillor King had his hand up before me. So, if I may, only because you are a non-member of the forum, if that's okay, and then I'll call the forum members afterwards. Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Chair. Now, in that case, yeah, I'll go straight in. I mean, to me, Tim, the first criterion should be, how does it address our climate change targets? Is it going to lead to an increase in carbon dioxide emissions or a reduction? And what kind of contribution is it making to that? The second thing I would want to put there was, what's the contribution to the local economy? Is the investment going to then kind of trickle away outside because it's a company not based in this area that we're using, or is it going to circulate in the local economy? So those are a couple for me. Cornwall, I note, are using the donut model. And I've also been to an LGA webinar recently on using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a sort of scoring matrix, which I think some other councils are using. Those are the two that I've come across. And both have their advantages and disadvantages. But I think we can kind of modify those ourselves. But to me, those are the two big ones.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. In order, we now have Councillor Young and then Councillor Gallard.
Thank you, Chair. I've just listed down some headings. Obviously, carbon savings is a priority. Opportunities for carbon capture, which I personally don't like the thought of using carbon capture, but there are companies that are willing to spend money on, say, planting of trees to benefit of their companies. So we need to be aware of that. We need to be looking at income opportunities, help to promote tourism, help develop health and well-being is another priority of ours. Match funding opportunities, such as carbon capture, and for providing business opportunities, obviously. Those are the sort of headings I'm looking at that this fund should be using. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm jotting all these down as we go. Councillor Gazzard, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to everybody. Like the other two previous speakers, I concur with their comments, but on question number 2, and this is just my thoughts, could there be a priority given to local businesses within the district that wish to pursue some sort of project rather than going more nationally, because I think it's important that we encourage our local entrepreneurs to come forward with ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions from members of the forum not in the meeting? Councillor Faithful, Councillor Moulding? No? Okay, just listening in which case we bring it back inside the forum. Councillor King, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. I have certainly comments to make about the 2 points that Tim Child asked about, but could I ask for clarification about I think it's the second bullet point, sitting behind the framework, a fund agreed by council to deliver, and so on. Put this down to me being a bit of a novice councillor. It's a point that's relevant at this point in time. There is correspondence that has been on the move between various councillors, and clarification was provided by Simon Davey, and I say that early on so as to give him a chance to collect his thoughts. It concerns, yes, I just think it's quite important. It concerns the point about reserves or funds and whether decisions have to go to council. And of a particular note, and I can say this very vaguely on the excuse that it was before my time, but that there was an investment in a particular large property east of the River Exe estuary, which is therefore unknown to the Exe Valley ward, and it was made behind closed doors slightly. It was made without disclosure to members at the time. I say that loosely, please accept my apologies for any inaccuracy. And it came from the Commercial Investment Fund. The Commercial Investment Fund, that decision did not go to council. So here we have the commercial, sorry, I'm just trying to pick up my notes. The Place and Property Investment Framework, which overrules the fund itself, and being advised that it therefore will not have to go to council. I'm just a bit bothered about that, and I would enjoy some clear statement that goes along with it, so that there isn't any confusion about decisions being made without enough say from council and other councillors. You know what I'm talking about. I apologise for coming in from sort of left field at this point. I do have some points to make about the very good 2 queries, Tim Child asking us for our opinions, but I think perhaps I should stop at this point for an answer, and then if I may, Chair, to come back on the 2 points.
Can I take that, Chair? I think that's a yes. So you're on mute, Councillor Hayward, but I'll take that as a yes. So in terms of the question, the investment framework, and in terms of the ability to borrow up to £20 million, and the framework itself went to council for approval. So that was set by council. And just to clarify, it's not money that's sat in the bank. It's not a reserve, the 20 million. It was the ability for the council to go and borrow. It was the approval given by council to go and borrow. The reasoning at the time was in order to generate a yield, to generate a return. So council had that report, had the framework and policy that it agreed. So then everything that was done following that up to the 20 million and in line with that investment framework was in agreement with that council approval, if you like.
Okay.
So that clarifies that. I haven't commented to Tim yet on the particular framework, but my thinking is that this would definitely have to go back to council, in that we're changing that original agreement that council gave, in that it gave the approval of 20 million borrowing, and that can be the same. But at the time it was approved with an investment framework that generated yield. This is now different. So my advice is it should go back through council for approval.
Well, thank you. So I quite understand. And it is not a reserve, and it is to do with borrowing. And it's not a blank check, it's permission to request borrowing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important in Tim's bullet point, the first bullet point, over to generate enough income to repay back principal and interest, because we haven't budgeted in the costs of a scheme that will actually cost the council. So it's cost neutral or better is the proposal.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you so much. If I can move on to answering the 2 points that Tim Child wanted us to cover. I do think that the points made by Councillor Davy, Young and Gazar, that I think they're very good. If I could just add that the idea of donut economics and the UN Sustainable Development Goal, I would suggest that both of those slightly different descriptions, they actually come from the same stable, insofar as the author of the donut economics actually works for the United Nations and is a bit of a evangelist on their behalf. I still regret the name donut economics, because it sounds as if it's involved in a cookery class, and it is nothing to do with that at all. I'm a bit bothered about trees and a few of the softer, more visible items. I'm very concerned about vanity projects. I think we need to be, in this topic of green and saving the world, I think we need to be ruthless in what it is, in where we put the investment. I mean ruthless against the framework. So I'm all for it. When one talks about investing along these lines, one is very quickly drawn to, so what will the effect be? What will be the benefit? And so on. I've got a feeling that, and I'm not putting words in Tim's mouth, I invite him to respond, but I've got a feeling that actually this is an enabling investment. So we're looking at leverage and gearing on what can be done. It is so as to set the stage for great contributions from the private sector, from existing businesses, and indeed from outside businesses coming in to help the existing business and the status quo do better. But I agree with the sentiment. We don't want them to come in on their own right, as if we are a holiday park for them. Carbon capture, I'm a bit bothered about, because that's rather like financial instruments that gave rise to the Big Bang. It's the banking collapse. Carbon capture is, I think, a little bit dodgy. So I think we need to set the scene, and I think also with Councillor Young, I think it was, yes, there was a hint of not just gross domestic product, but also gross domestic happiness, because a contented community and workforce is so much more productive and has much more wholesome goals and ambitions, I believe, for the longer term. So my own raw ideas, I've been commenting so far, riding on the backs of others. My own comments, I think, relate to the need to be more local. Although we have to have communications to connect into the wider economy, I think we need to recalibrate on the basis that we can continue with so many of the lessons and changes that have occurred in lockdown. We can decide how much of that we continue as a good thing, or how much we should revert to the old ways, which I think in many instances, not across the board, could be regressive. It could be a bad idea. And just for a spanner in the works, just take high streets. And at the moment, we want to shore up those high streets, bring them back into life. I do suggest, and this is just an example, I do suggest we are very circumspect and say, have actually some fundamentals shifted such that if we put the high streets back on the same standing that they were, to what extent is that putting good money after bad and not recognizing a fundamental change that has taken place? And that's for debate. But I think just talking about that adds color to what I'm really driving at, which is that we need to recognize the changes that have occurred over COVID, over the period of the COVID lockdowns, because it's absolutely true. We've all heard it in various ways. It's absolutely true that, especially on the technology front, there has been a telescoping, a shortening of the cycle of change dramatically. Some have said that home working and the use of technology has 15 years worth of development has actually been brought forward into the first 12 months. Obviously, there will be bounce back, but it's a question of how much. So please, in our considerations, could we account for how much change is going to remain after the settling down from COVID on such things as transport, commuting, places of work, home working, telecommunications, video conferencing, and home learning, not just home learning, but continual professional development on the basis of remote learning. Okay, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Tim, do you want to come back on that? And then I might, if I may, just bring in Councillor Young from outside the forum and then take it back inside.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Just very briefly. So, yeah, there's obviously so far there's a big focus on climate change, a big focus on supporting local businesses, making sure our investments remain local. I just wanted to very briefly to bring us back to the discussion at the February AMF, which linked this in, which basically, this is a tool for East Devon to put our money, our investment where our mouth is, and directly support economic recovery, and tying in, rather than sort of creating something additional, linking it in with the Team Devon economic recovery work. And as I said, using this as so from the Team Devon economic recovery work and all of the work that Andy Wood and his service are involved in, using this as just one tool and one investment stream. So there will be other investment streams through levelling up, through various other things, but this being one investment stream that the council has as its sort of within its gift through an adopted framework and a fund, and it's to enable us to actively deliver against those Team Devon economic recovery priorities. Doesn't mean that we can't absolutely ensure around climate change and clean, inclusive growth. That is key in terms of all of that work, and I'd see that as being absolutely key here. So I think, yeah, I really just would make a point. It's a tool that needs to sit within that wider economic recovery work, rather than it being a tool for us to deliver something that's not so closely aligned with economic recovery, if that makes sense. But thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I mean, touching on the point that Councillor King made, the world has changed an awful lot. And unless we factor in those points, almost you're behind the curve. So we've got to somehow within this forum and the council almost to some degree have to predict where it's going to be and make the judgment calls then. Otherwise, you just make decisions that are proved, sadly, lacking as events overtake. Councillor Young, if I can come to you, and then I'll bring in the forum members again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify on carbon capture, it's something that I would think any company would want to do only as a last resort if they can't get to carbon zero. And now that is the way that I think this council should be thinking. But we do want more public access land, and we do want to plant a lot more trees, and we haven't got much land to plant those trees on. And companies around the world and in the UK are wanting to invest in carbon offsets. Now, I'd rather see their investments being spent in the UK and possibly in East Devon rather than in the Congo. We need to be in a position to be able to receive that funding and to be able to spend it in what we think is the appropriate way. That's what I'm talking about, carbon capture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, naively from my point of view, it's a lovely vision to have lots of open space, plant trees that are just planted to fell. So for their 10-year cycle, they're absorbing carbon, they're capturing it, and at the end, you have a byproduct that's replaced by another tree planted on a cyclical basis, then turn that into a product that can be sold. Now, of course, going back 10 years, this was a consideration in Axminster about biomass, converting boilers to that. It never went forward, and I don't know enough about the biomass residential wood burning thing. I mean, Councillor Young, this is right up your alley. But of course, that is reliant on having land. And then, of course, if you were to purchase the land, plant the trees, you're paying out for 10 years before you see any yield. And I'm sure that's the thing that stymies it. So investing elsewhere, but I suppose that's what we've got to consider, is investing in companies that aren't local. Is that enough? Does the green benefits of that outweigh the lack of localism? And I'll be very grateful to hear other forum members' view on this. Councillor Pratt, over to you, sir.
Yes, Tim, we have exchanged some correspondence on this matter. And in regard to this investment fund, the idea is to deliver economic recovery projects. And the ones we have discussed were these two parcels of land in Seaton. It came about, as you know, because we were saying we should be looking at our own existing assets before we go out and invest elsewhere. And you have said that you would hope that the two Seaton projects could go into the fund. Is that correct? And how would that work?
Chair, do you want me to respond direct?
Oh, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So the starting point is and it goes back to the two questions actually in today's report: what are we seeking to achieve, and what are our priorities? My comments regarding the Seaton sites, they are two sites that we need to bring forward one way or another. Well, either we need to bring forward, or we need to dispose of. We need to do something with. I would so, and I discussed this earlier in the meeting. One of the sort of key issues with those sites are around viability, but actually, if we were to adopt a new framework or a new fund, as we've been talking about today, where we're looking at repaying PWLB costs only, then actually potentially it makes that viable, potentially, or certainly more viable. So yes, I'm looking at those two sites as a possible as two projects that are possibly delivered as a result of this investment framework. But I'm also very mindful that we need to get the framework right. What is it we're looking to deliver? And then we put all of our opportunities through that, rather than almost trying to sort of pigeonhole sort of specific projects into something. So yeah, I'd like to think that Seaton projects would score well, but ultimately it will depend on how we score that, what scoring mechanism we introduce, and therefore the priorities and objectives from this group and from Cabinet as we move forward. So I suppose it's just slightly premature to say no, those two schemes would be within this, because we need to determine first what are we looking to deliver. It could be actually as part of the economic recovery work and the Team Devon work that other funding opportunities are perhaps found to be more suitable for those sites. And again, it's getting best value for our investment. So yeah, so the priority really needs to be get the framework adopted and then put the opportunities through.
Yes, so if we develop those sites ourselves, the benefit, of course, is we already own the sites. Otherwise, if we look at other investments, we're going to have to purchase them and then develop them. So there is an economic advantage in dealing with assets that we already hold. That's where I'm coming from, really. And I think that was generally considered at the last meeting. I believe Councillor Hayward and Councillor Arnott were sort of supporting that view. Investing, though, at this moment in time, as has already been said by Councillor King, it's a very difficult time to invest money in property or business, whatever sort of thing you're looking at, because of the COVID implications. For example, yesterday, I think it was, that BP announced that 24,000 members of their employees would be working 2 days a week at home rather than working in the office. And what's future is there for investment in office property? And the same with retail. That is very dodgy. Working in the high streets is not going to be, or investing in the high streets is not going to be an easy option. So there's a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Just before I go to Councillor Rowland and Councillor Arnott, so I suppose, you know, bear in mind what you've said and what Mr. Childs has responded to about getting the framework right. Let's consider, let's say, a hypothetical situation. So you have this land in one of our towns. So looking at the list, and as I went through them, that Councillor Young and Councillor Davey put forward, so running them in that order. So let's just say you decide to flatten what's there and rebuild as an investment. So as you've said, Councillor Pratt, you already own the land, so there's no land acquisition cost, it's just a build cost. You make those buildings, whatever they are, as green as they possibly can be. So every power source in it. So you have solar arrays, you have ground source, air source, you have a wind turbine on the site. You surround the entire site in trees so that you are adding some green credentials, some carbon capture, some screening. Those businesses provide business opportunities to the local area. Now, let's just say that a local surfboard manufacturer, if it's a coastal town, wants to go into there. Well, now you've created retail opportunities, you've created employment, you've created health and well-being. The local community is delighted that businesses setting up, so the happiness index rises. You encourage tourism. So, you know, from one investment, if it's done right, and this is the crux of what we're trying to get to, actually the benefit to a community and a district is immense, because you work out what the community needs, what the region needs, and you build things that will accommodate that. You know, all these things need an office resource, an admin resource. So do you have a serviced office? You know, I know that this has waned, but exactly as Councillor King has said, the world has changed. You know, people perhaps don't want to sit in an office all day. They want the ability to nip in and out of an office and have access to a conference room. You know, the what they call it, the Regus model. You know, because I think that's where some investigation is needed. And I know that Andy Wood is on top of this and looking at all the opportunities. That's what he does day in, day out for the council, and I'm very grateful for his insight on this. But yes, I wholeheartedly agree. A framework is essential, but some in-depth research to work out how the world is changing, what we can build. I mean, I come back to the point that Councillor Ledge and I have talked about many times in terms of housing. You know, this concept that to build a house, it must be made of bricks and must be made to traditional standards. Well, with Passive House and European and Scandinavian models, and certainly German models, all you need is a concrete pad. The house is delivered to you, it's built in 6 weeks, it's occupied. And I know that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but if it can be done with houses, then why can't it be done with commercial structures? You know, if you are a serviced office provider, then you have a captive audience. You can sell your tenants an electricity supply, a gas supply if needed, a telephony supply, a broadband supply. You are the agent for all those things. And on each of those things, you make a cut. And I suppose this is the commercialism that we have to consider, is it isn't just a case of sticking out our hand every month saying, can we have some rent, please? You sell them the whole deal. For anyone who's worked in sales, you'll know when someone walks in to buy a tube of toothpaste, you want to be selling them a toothbrush. You want to be selling them everything else on the counter, because that's the game of sales. It's a comprehensive thing. So once you've got them as a captive audience, you sell them everything. And I'd like to think that we can move forwards, because there's so much potential in this. It's a lot of work. And it's a change from perhaps what we've done before, but the world has changed, and certainly the way we're funded has changed. So we've got to move with the times. And if we're not a business, but we can be business-like. And that's why I'm delighted to be having this chat today. And I'm going to shut up now. Councillor Rowland, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I won't cover the climate agenda, which has adequately been covered by other councillors already, although I'm very much in favour of what's been said on that particular score. What I really wanted to focus in on is the economy, though, side of this. I think we have a fantastic opportunity here to take long-term views about providing infrastructure. Because in my opinion, if we can demonstrate that we've got the confidence to invest in that type of thing, and I can give you an example further on in what I'm talking about, I see that as really pump priming further private investment to bring into an area. I think if we relied on the reverse of that happening, I think we'd still be sat here in another 5 years' time, still waiting for that to happen in view of the current climate. But I think I'm firmly of the opinion that if there is going to be problems with a recession as a result of this pandemic, what we're already experiencing it to some extent, this is the very time where authorities can demonstrate that they can invest for the long-term future to help pump primer, as I said, private investment. I think when we're talking about the high streets, I think we all need to accept and recognise now that high streets are never going to be the same. They're never going to revert to what they were because of a number of factors. But what needs to happen is that we're so heavily reliant on the tourist economy in our region that we need to bring people in to see attractions that will then have spin-off benefits for the local businesses. So if I can give you an example of what I'm talking about as well, and I'm going to be parochial and talk about Seaton, I'm afraid, but if I look to see how long it's taken us to even get to a certain point with the seafront enhancement scheme, that's been heavily reliant on just the town council trying to deliver that. And I think we're all recognising now that that's not enough on its own. A large part of that area is in the ownership of East Devon District Council anyway. So I'd like to see potentially using this as an example of how this can actually help, because that seafront enhancement scheme, if it was delivered in its original guise of the planning application, which was unfortunately expired, but could easily be reapplied for, is a classic example of where that would boost more people coming into the area, which would then have spin-off benefits for all the local economy. And I see that as a good example of what we could be talking about. Health and well-being was also mentioned, and I can recall as well previous discussions within this council before this administration took over, which was along the lines of, well, East Devon is not really involved in health and well-being. We rely on really that coming from Devon County Council or the National Health Service. I think there are good opportunities for us to be more involved in health and well-being issues, to help work with the NHS and Devon County Council, because again, I see so many spin-off benefits for potentially helping on the climate agenda by having reduced travel times for people, that because of the location of the main hospitals in our area, and I'm even talking about across the border as well, where we could work with other authorities on this to help reduce travel time and produce more health provision closer to home. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity that we've got here, and we just need to grasp it and agree what the priorities are. But I'd like to say that the example I gave about certain seafront enhancement scheme being parochial about it is a good example of what we could deliver. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jack. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. I think both you and Councillor Rowland have covered a lot of what I would have wanted to say, so I won't repeat any of it, except to endorse Councillor Pratt's comment that the more, and I suspect this would be very much in accord with Councillor Ledger's strategies as well with regard to housing, the more we can identify our own assets, our own land assets, whether they be brownfield or otherwise, and the more we make use of those moving forward to develop them for good social and economic purposes with a profit attached, the better. And I do think moving forward that should be a core of all of this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I suppose that old adage of the one thing they're not making anymore of is land. So if we own it and develop it, it's always going to be worth something. When you build houses, when you build commercial investment, you do it for a reason, because you know there's going to be a return. But ultimately, at the end, you're renting it. And at the end of that cycle, it's still yours. And I appreciate you have to maintain those buildings. But we, again, are very lucky. We have, as a council, an in-house maintenance team. We have contractual arrangements with people. So, but it's number crunching, isn't it? So, okay, so I have no other hands up. I suppose the issue here now is Tim has asked us for
Chair, I forgive me, but I could, Councillor Ledger's got a slightly strange coloured hand up. I don't know if that's deliberate or.
Indeed, my apologies, Councillor Ledger. It does blend in. You somehow have managed to blur your camera in a very sort of Helmut Newton, Vaseline on the lens sort of way. Very, very iconic. But your beige coloured hand, let me call it, does blend in very well with the background and your shirt. So my apologies. Over to you.
No problem at all, Chair. I just want to throw in a slight curveball. I completely agree with what everyone has said today. And this kind of stems from the Cllr working party that we had last week. And looking at infrastructure, our infrastructure delivery plan across the district on what's deemed as priorities for infrastructure delivery. And I was just wondering whether we could give any weight to any of the items listed, that we could commercialise any of the infrastructure listed in the plan to basically boost delivery across the district. I know obviously the money that we're getting is going to be borrowed, but we can borrow at a much lower rate than any other entity really well, most other entities listed in the delivery plan, and whether we could look to deliver infrastructure for community and social gain across the district, and whether we could push that as one of the priorities.
Thank you very much. Any members, does anyone wish to comment? Tim, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah. So just to make sure I sort of properly understand that, obviously having not been involved in this Cllr working party, can you just give me just sort of a practical example, if you could, please, Councillor Ledger, if you're able to.
So I'm looking at it now. So it covers anything from. I'm obviously not saying that we would get involved with delivering schools or new road infrastructure, but looking at the lower priorities for priority 2 and 3. It could be anything as small as installing floodlights for Honiton Rugby Club and things like that. We obviously we do it as a loan, or we do it as match funding or something like that. Or just try and work out ways of delivering it so that we can commercialize it in some form. I'm picking a bad option there, but it gives you a flavour of what we could do.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Councillor. I can understand where you're coming from now. I just need to add an example, and yeah, there are probably other examples, but it helps explain it. So that's, I suppose, more of a sort of possibly the peer-to-peer lending, which was something that was discussed at the February meeting. So yeah, okay, I'll give that some thought. Okay, yeah, no, we'll do. Councillor Hayward, before we finish, is it possible for me just to sort of wrap things up, perhaps after you sort of summarise where you think we are now?
I'd be delighted if you want to sum up. I think I go on too much, so people have heard my voice. Please, if you'd like to sum up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure I go on too much as well, so I'll keep this brief. But so I'm taken from this, which isn't a surprise in any way, the importance of climate change. Having said that, this is around economic recovery. So I suppose the starting point, certainly from my perspective, is economic recovery, linking it in rather than sort of almost reinventing the wheel, linking it in where possible with the team Devon economic recovery work, and using this as a tool, one of a number of tools to make things happen. We talk about making things happen. We talked about the opportunity to make better use of our assets. Yes, absolutely, and that's really quite exciting, because that's within our gift. We could sit here today and say, well, we want to go out and buy land to build things on. Well, that's fine if the land's available, but we have a large asset base which has many opportunities. So that's really, really positive. We've also talked about the need to deliver, and now over the coming years, as we fully sort of come out of the economic consequences from COVID, and I think again, if we're using our land, then that absolutely puts the power back in our hands. So it's sort of driven predominantly economic recovery. Climate change is another key factor that it needs to tick the economic recovery, but it must be done in a way that also fulfills our climate change emergency declaration and ensures that we do everything we can to get maximum climate change benefit out of it. I've also picked out a theme around local businesses, and that then comes back to exactly what we're looking to deliver and getting maximum benefit from our investment. So there's something there. The bit that we haven't spoken about, and before we sort of finish off on this, I just wanted to pose, I suppose, as a question, because I'm sure it probably is intended, although no one's actually mentioned it, because it is linked to economic recovery. Poverty, and linking it in with the council's poverty work. Is that something that members think is necessary? And I'm getting certainly one thumbs up, and I suspect it's all been implied by the fact it's economic recovery, but I just wanted to tease out, because I think where we can, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's link it in with Team Bevan's economic recovery work. Then from a local level, link it into, well, actually, what assets do we have and what can we deliver, what's in our gift, and then linking it in with other strategies, priorities, agendas that we already have in place, climate change and poverty. So I think I've got enough to sort of work with. I've had quite a lot of sort of comments about the donut model and the UN sustainability goals model. So again, let's not sort of try and reinvent the wheel. So I will have a good look at those models and see if we can adapt that to suit us. So that's where I think we are. I'm quite happy to be corrected if I've missed anything out there.
Thank you very much indeed. Seems to be getting thumbs up from members. That was the last agenda item, and thank you very much for Tim for bringing this all together, and thank you to members for attending. Are there any other points that members wish to raise before we draw the meeting to a close? I think it is a tricky one. Councillor Davey.
Can I just throw in, Tim, a quick plea for well-being as well? What does it do for social cohesion, for people's spirits? I think Councillor Hayward mentioned that in the context of trees and greening areas and so on. But I think that should be one as well. What does it do for people's feelings and well-being locally as well?
I wrote that down, Councillor Davey, and I think it was you who said it. So thank you. I was repeating your words back to you. Yeah, so health and well-being, Councillor King alluded to the happiness index. And so those are the strands that, as Tim has said, poverty and how we eradicate it and stop it come into that, because people who aren't in poverty are happier. They feel better, they're healthier people. And so for the good of the whole of East Devon, that's an improvement. So it must feature in our plans. And I think I'm certainly heartened. And it's not a criticism of any previous council or administration that, what central government asked councils to do was focus on pound notes. You simply have got to make a return, and that means commercial investment to create a yield, because you're not going to get the money some another way. But I am really heartened by a change in focus, that actually investment can deliver some of that, but actually a focus on social good, on economic good, on climate change good, and on health and well-being good. It's actually a different way of looking at it, because those things taking in conjunction actually do a vast amount of good, and the ripples of that spread out. And if you just look at investment simply for the pound, shillings and pence, it's not really an ethical way to move forward. It makes people money, but as a council, we're responsible for so much more. So yes, thank you very much, Councillor Daly, for pointing it out. I think I'll read out our preamble now.
Chair, can I interrupt you a second before you do? Just to pull this item to a close, if I may. Although you haven't got a recommendation as such, you've had some debate that's going back there to the service lead to feed in. Just for the sake of completeness, is it worth just having a recommendation that members have noted the report, given their feedback, and look forward to a future report from the service lead, giving a more detailed framework as a result?
That exact phrase was a fantastic idea. Thank you very much, Debbie. Councillor King.
May I propose that?
Of course, thank you. And I'm happy to second that. all Debbie's words. So members, would you be happy to show your green hands in support of that recommendation to note?
Thank you. For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is now underway. Okay, I've got 4 votes in favour, so that is carried, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for
Chair, I do. This is not the first time, actually. I think there was 6. Yeah, I'm wondering if Debbie's seeing or Wendy's seeing all of the hands, because it happened last time as well.
I think on.
I can only see 5.
Definitely 6 on my screen, Debbie.
1 has gone.
Yeah, I must be still using an old version of this on my PC because my green hand just disappeared after a short while.
Yours was there, Chair. Anyway, it's worth us having a look at this because it was clearly we're all seeing different numbers. Worth reporting to DS. Thank you.
I can just clarify, Chair. I think that's just the version of Zoom that you're using, so it is flashing up temporarily and then disappearing. But we can easily get that resolved when you've upgraded your.
Well, just for absolute certainty, for the purpose of the forum members here who are voting to note the recommendation and to note the report and to propose we take this forward, is there any member of the forum who is opposed to that? Could you make yourself known? Is there any member who wishes to abstain from that recommendation? No. So therefore, I hope that Councillor King, are you abstaining?
Not at all. There's a coincidence of me cancelling and someone else cancelling. Yes.
The joys of technology. I think that's a unanimous yes. Thank you very much indeed, Debbie. I appreciate you you reminding me of that. So that brings our meeting to an end, and I would sincerely like to thank everyone, including members of the public, for watching online, for everyone who took part, and to all the officers who've come together to make it happen. Can I remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live, and until then, your comments will be live to the public. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely, lovely day.